My intermediate milestone number 2 for my EduTech project. The project is the second edition of my book Hands-on Machine Learning for Algorithmic Trading that has been published by Pakt last December. And this book comes with over 100 notebooks with code examples that illustrate how you can use machine learning to generate trading signals. So the goal of the project is to improve the books so that it becomes more practical, based on some of the research that I did in the first phase, and to specifically focus on the backtesting aspect of trading in much more detail, because that was one of the main items of feedback I got from readers. So in addition, I'm planning to set up a website that allows users to create profiles, interact with each other, and get access to additional material so that they can practice more. So I've made quite some progress in the last 2-3 weeks. Unfortunately, due to the publishing contract, I can't really share the material directly, but I show this to you in the video a little bit how things have moved forward. So I've worked on 4 chapters so far, 4 to 7. The goal was originally to write number 8, which is a new chapter that in depth demonstrate how you select data for a strategy, pick your investment universe, engineer features, pick a model and train a machine learning model that generates signal, then build a trading strategy around this model and ultimately backtest it to see how it would have done in market. To first write this chapter, but as I started that, it turned out that I actually had to modify several of the prior chapters to get enough background in place. So I've done this, and I've also written and just provided the publisher and the technical reviewers with some of the code samples for 4, 5, 6, and 7. That's all new stuff. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So this is chapter 4. Chapter 4 is about how you use financial data to generate they call these alpha factors or general features that hopefully are predictive of returns. And there's a long history in finance on how you can do this. So there's a revised chapter on how this is typically done in finance and which kind of factor categories exist. And then I move on to illustrate how you can actually use this. And there's a lot of new material here. Originally, I just had some examples on how to use pandas and NumPy to do some basic data transformation, and now I'm using TALib, which uses technical factors, and present this in a separate notebook. And also I added the Kalman filter and wavelets in a new notebook. So this is all new material to show more advanced techniques about how you sort of denoise time series. And then I move on to, this is also rewritten, so there's new introduction to backtesting. This is the first time I introduced backtesting in the book, so I revised this a little bit, so in order for this to be more compatible with the sort of more with a more focused approach to backtesting later in the book. So this is kind of chapter 4, and here's one of the new notebooks that deals with Kalman filter and wavelets. And so it illustrates how you can use the Kalman filter to, similar to moving average, but in a more adaptive way, smoothen time series or factors that you computed. And similarly, how can you use wavelets to extract a filter for specific patterns in your data. So this kind of illustrates a new technique here, and the book also references this. Chapter 5 is about portfolio optimization. So the question is, once you make a bunch of trades, you accumulate positions, and of course stocks returns, or generally asset returns, are related or correlated with each other. So gains on some positions can compensate losses elsewhere. So you want to maybe leverage that because it allows you to improve your your risk profile without possibly without affecting performance in a negative way. So I have a few new examples and better explanation of how you could implement this in Python. Most importantly, this is a new section here that also emphasizes the backtesting aspect and demonstrate how you, within the backtest, can apply various portfolio optimization techniques. So this already leads up to kind of the more in-depth chapter 8 that will tackle backtesting in more detail. And so there's a few new, two new notebooks here in the trait simulation part. Chapter 6 is about the machine learning workflow itself. So this is more like traditional machine learning with the entire, define your objectives and engineer your features, clean your data, and select an algorithm, cross-validate, hyperparameters, evaluate, and so forth. This was there before. This is more cleaned up and rewritten with a few minor aspects in the end, because there's been some research on how you do cross-validation with time series data, which is something that we used throughout the book. So I sort of expanded on a few pieces here. The latest, and this is a relatively long chapter. So this I was planning on having at this point the backtesting chapter, but I really need some linear or some machine learning models ready at this point. So this book sort of introduces linear models, linear regression in the sort of traditional form, and then the more modern or the model is more tailored for prediction that use shrinkage to sort of manage this bias variance trade-off. And so here I introduce how you can use linear models for prediction, and these are the results that I will use for the backtesting chapter. And that's largely rewritten because the original book uses the Quantopian platform, but I wanted to give users the opportunity to do this independent offline. So I rewrote this so that you can use train the models locally and then input the data into a local backtesting engine, which again is going to be the subject of the next chapter. So I rewrote much of this with new features using the results of chapter 4 and demonstrating how you can predict daily returns in this context. So that's a relatively long chapter with almost 50 pages. And there's a few new notebooks on using logistic regression to predict price movements and various types of linear regression to predict the actual returns as a regression problem. This is kind of what that looks like. So here's kind of the features that we engineer and this specific time series cross-validation approach that we introduced in chapter 6. And then we produce predictions and evaluate them using information coefficient and so forth. So much new material here. And this is the outline for the new chapter 8 that will focus on sort of the end-to-end workflow that basically brings everything together that the book has been treating up to this point. And it talks about not only the methodology per se, but also the numerous issues that have been discussed quite a bit in recent years, because the ability of machine learning to find a lot of patterns in data, of course, also poses risks, because you might just be overfitting to historical data and then really not fare so well in with new data. And then I'll dive into generally how backtesting works, and in the sense that we need to simulate markets and actual trading situations and all the different pieces that we need for this to work properly. And then I introduced two different libraries, namely Backtrader and Zipline, how they work, and talk about the overall concepts, architecture that they use. They differ a little bit in how they approach this backtesting challenge, and then walk through the practical aspects of loading data, both the traditional price data that often is kind of the centerpiece, but also numerous additional data, either other raw input data sources or data sources that you may have pre-computed. and work through basically the workflow of a backtest and the evaluation of the results. And in the end, I touch on a few alternatives and give some advice on folks that would like to build their own backtesting engine. So that's where I am so far, and what's missing right now is the website. So I found both that working on sort of the chapters leading up to the backtesting part was more productive than writing that directly, because I constantly found myself either having to replicate or duplicate material from other chapters. So I found it better to reorganize the workflow a little bit. And also, in the end, I thought it more sensible to produce more content and then focus on the website towards the end, because obviously having the content ready makes it a little easier to present it. So that's kind of where I am right now. What I'll do next is revisit the initial chapters on the data sources, because I'm using a few additional sources in this book on the second edition. So it also makes more sense to introduce that, where I actually introduce data sources rather than in this chapter 8, and then finally write that. And I think chapters 2 to 8 will be sufficient to kind of generally demonstrate the approach. The book overall has 21 chapters, so publication will be in March. I keep working on that later. And then I'll also take the last 2 weeks of the term to focus on the website and getting this live. So I think overall that should work from a timing basis. Thank you very much. So this is kind of the overall task list here. I'll submit that so you can also see what's left to do. Overall, I'm pretty confident that we'll get this done timing-wise, but of course any feedback is most welcome. Thank you for listening and watching, and that's it for today.